All right. In the news right now is a lot about the debt ceiling. Goldie, what the hell is the debt ceiling?
The debt ceiling is stupid. There, have I concisely defined it? It is this
Sure. Could you say more?
Yeah, it's this arcane garbage piece of legislation that dates back to the early 20th century, I think, which back when we had an entirely different economy in a different world, that basically says that puts a cap on how much debt the United States can raise. And every few years, that means Congress has to vote to raise the debt ceiling, which is an opportunity for Republicans, if they're in the majority, to hold a Democratic president hostage if there's a Democrat in the White House. Just be clear. This crisis never happens when both parties control the White House and Congress. And the Republicans never do that to Republican presidents. And in fact, Democrats never do it to Republican presidents. It's only when Republicans control Congress and there's a Democrat in the White House, we have to have this stupid, do we curse on this? I can't remember. This stupid effing debate over whether or not to raise the debt ceiling, which is a technicality. Because, it's totally meaningless in the modern world, except as a bit of political hostage taking.
Yeah, and we should be clear. Listen, as you said, this has been on the books for a really long time.
Right.
Of course, this got put onto the books. If I recall correctly, we may have still been under the gold standard when this
probably
was
when money was gold. Right.
Yeah, right. When our dollar was attached and pegged to gold. This was before they had a modern economy, the modern economy that we're now living under. And I think the other thing that's super important is for a long time, this was a pro forma thing. Congress would approve spending, and then you would pro forma approve the debt to finance the spending that you approved.
Right.
And it is a recent phenomenon really taken up by the radicals that came into Congress as a pushback against President Obama. They realized they had this tool at their disposal where they could hostage take, where they could literally say, I will not raise your debt ceiling. I will not let you pay for the things that this Congress agreed to pay for unless you give me concessions. That's new. This is a totally new phenomenon. And as you point out, it has not actually ever happened where Democrats used it against Republicans. And of course, it has never happened when there was one party control including, of course, when Republicans controlled Congress under Trump.
Right. And understand what they're threatening is if we don't raise the debt ceiling, the United States of America will default on its debt. That is the nuclear alternative of economics. Because if the United States of America defaults on its debt, something it has never done in its history, something which, by the way, constitutionally, it is required not to do, it would be unconstitutional to default on the debt. So if the United States government defaulted on its debt, it would never, ever, 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 ever recover, politically or economically. The benefits that we get from the dollar being the reserve currency, the cheap interest rates, the cheapest interest rates in the world, the U.S. government gets to borrow at, we would never have that again. It would be lost forever. We would be ceding the global economy. The Chinese currency controlled by the Chinese Communist Party would end up being the world's reserve currency because nobody would be able to trust the United States anymore. And here's the thing. I think there's a large majority of Republicans, of elected Republicans, who think that's great. That's fine, as long as it makes Biden look bad and maybe we get another white nationalist in the White House. Am I going too far there?
So let's be really clear. So what happens is, as a reminder, how this works is the Congress controls the purse strings. Mm-hmm. They write a budget. That budget is agreed upon between both chambers of Congress, the House and the Senate, and then the president ultimately has to accept that budget. That's how this whole thing works. They decide a budget. Then you have to figure out how you're going to finance the budget. But once you've made the decision to spend the money, you have to finance it. And our system is set up that you will finance that with debt, candidly, like we finance a lot of things in our lives. We keep hearing about this. Yeah, and most businesses. We keep hearing about this, take the credit card away. We've got to take the credit card away and apply some discipline. Well, here's the deal. This president did not use this credit card. In fact, actually, it's pretty fair to say that this president and the budgets that they have passed have been actually quite responsible. A big part of the reason is that they have asked the wealthy to pay their fair share. Mm-hmm. In the previous administration and the previous Republican Congress, they dramatically cut taxes, which were totally unsustainable. They were very clear about how unsustainable it is. Didn't matter what model you looked at. It told you this was totally unsustainable. It was going to balloon the debt. So they made a bunch of unsustainable choices. Yet we still raised the debt ceiling to be able to pay for those choices. Here we are now, even though we have more responsible budgets, we're raising the debt. They're refusing to raise the debt ceiling. So this challenge is not, they have already spent the money. The money has been spent. They've agreed to spend it in the budget. This is simple hostage taking. It is really important that we understand that these are two separate things. If you want to have a conversation about how we spend money and how we prioritize, there is a process to do that. It's called the budgeting process, and we should do it in the normal course. You should not hold the debt ceiling over people's heads. It is really dangerous, as Goldie points out. It's dangerous and destabilizing. And I want to be clear, the number one people that the U.S. government owes debt to is the American people. So you hold this debt. Many of you hold this debt in your retirement accounts and treasury accounts, on and on. So it is very important that we all have confidence in our government's ability to pay its debts. Now, in this way, this is incredibly dangerous what they are doing. On the other hand, they have proven they are willing to do very dangerous things, and they are indeed willing to harm the economy actively for political gain. Well, let's get into it. Do you think what should we be concerned about the debt when you think about that? Okay,
no, of course
not. Wait a minute, why?
Well, first of all, let's understand the reason why you have debt. First of all, we need debt. Like, if you think about where's the safest place to park your money, it's U.S. Treasuries. Without U.S. Treasuries, there is no safe place for corporations and rich people to park their money until they're ready to use it. This is what you do. You buy short-term treasuries to park your money safely. You know why? Because the U.S. government never defaults on its debt. It is the safest investment anywhere. And because we have the dollar is the reserve currency, it's the most stable currency in the world. So you have two things going for you with U.S. Treasuries. One, U.S. government will never default on it. Two, the dollar is really, really stable and generally overvalued, which has to do with various other choices we make. So it's a good place to park your money. So the economy needs that. Without that, just total chaos in the global economy.
Let's relate this to something that regular people can understand. You know, when you are making investments in your life, frequently you take out some debt, right? I don't know, Goldie, you bought a house, right?
I bought a house, right? And you know what?
What is that a good use of debt?
Of course it was, because even though I had this big chunk of debt and I was paying interest on it, the house was increasing in value faster than the debt. So actually, over time, what happens is, and this is something people don't understand about government debt, one of the reasons why you never pay it off, it would be dumb to pay down the debt, is that over time, inflation eats away at the principal. That means that this past, couple years of inflation, that those trillions of dollars of U.S. debt were devalued by the price of inflation. That was a losing prospect for people who owned those bonds, right? They were still happy to have those bonds because it was safe in an unstable economy. But that's how governments always pay off their debt. Piketty is clear on this. If you go back to his book, Capital in the 21st Century, that is how debt gets paid off. Government, you never want to pay off the principal because A, inflation is eating away at the value of the principal, and B, if you're spending your money well, as the U.S. generally does, believe it or not, the economy is growing faster than your debt. So what you don't want to look at how big the debt is. That's meaningless both in terms of inflation adjusted dollars and as a percentage of the economy. Where governments run into trouble is when their debt is growing as a percentage of the economy. And this is really, really important, their debt is not denominated in their own currency. The U.S. debt is always denominated in dollars. When you get a country like Argentina that runs into trouble, that's because their debt is denominated in U.S. dollars, and their economy is not growing as fast as their debt is growing with the interest payments, and they don't have the dollars to pay their debt. They can't pay their dollars because their own currency isn't worth enough. And they need dollars to buy stuff, to import things, as well as to pay their debt. The U.S. doesn't have that problem. So as long as the U.S. economy is growing over the long run, obviously we ran up debt during the pandemic because we had to. I don't blame that part of the Trump debt on Trump. The tax cuts were a different issue, but the spending, well worth it. It was necessary. We did more of that under Biden. We're now bringing down the deficit faster than at any time in history at the same time that the economy is growing. So long term, there's no debt crisis whatsoever. And as long as we keep paying our bills and as long as we don't default on our debt, it's still going to be extremely affordable.
Yeah, that's right. And so you should really be very careful. People use these terms to scare you. Most of them are ideological about it. They are actively clear. They want to destroy the capacity of government to be an active participant in people's lives. They famously want to drown it in a bathtub. And part of what they're trying to say is, with all of this, is to scare you, to destabilize government and to shrink it. And part of what that is about, actually, is shrinking its capacity to do good things in the world.
Right.
And of course, at the end of the day, this is not a problem as long as we are making shrewd investments in the capacities, the human capital, the purposes of the country, and making good investments in infrastructure and other things. And actually, part of what we've seen under this Biden team, they're making really, really smart investments. These are great uses of our resources. And they're asking the wealthy and the powerful to pay their fair share into the system. So they are raising taxes on the wealthy and raising taxes on corporations. And this is leading, as Goldie pointed out, to a dramatic decline in our deficit. This is good news. And the worst thing you can do is to raise the specter of the debt to destabilize the economy, which of course is what so many conservatives are looking for. So Goldie, the final thing is we should talk a little bit about what we can expect over the next few months. I think we're going to unfortunately talk about this a lot. There's a lot of hay that the political press corps wants to make about it. There's a lot of hay that Republicans in Congress want to make about it. And of course, unfortunately, Biden has to do something about this. He's going to have to figure this out. And then on top of that all, the global markets are going to start to respond to this. You already see some of that. There is nervousness. They're more nervous about default on this case than they were last time that this happened. And for somewhat good reason. There are some nihilists in charge here, and they may actually want to shoot the hostage, as it were. So this is going to play out over many months. I will say one of the things we do know, interestingly, because of the big boost in spending at the IRS, which has allowed the IRS to do its job much better than it used to do. We have record, at least in the last few years, amounts of tax revenue that has come in, which is going to push out the deadline. So the Treasury sets a deadline when they're no longer going to be able to pay the debts, and that mark is a moving mark. Right. They don't have a set number. They have to estimate it. And they already know that it's not going to be in June. It's likely to be in July. It probably could even go a little further. So this is going to be a moving mark. We do not have a drop dead. It's not like the election day. We do know that, or on Christmas Day, this is a moving mark. We're not quite sure when this is going to fall down. Unfortunately, we're going to be probably trapped in this right up until the end of some brinkmanship. Certainly what happened last time, we expect there'll probably be some brinkmanship here. Hopefully cooler heads will prevail.